Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. And it's wonderful Wednesday with double dose Jessie. So I always smile on these days because we're always seeing the comments and people buzzing in the chat rooms and everyone popping on as we get going. So it's always wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And with our beautiful Jessie and Morné, of course. How are you guys? Is everyone well?
We are doing great.
Good. What's
Awesome.
this?
How's your week, Jess? Have you had any interesting things going on? Anything you want to
Oh, been
share with our
good.
viewers?
Yeah, nice and relaxing. Yeah, just working on stuff behind the scenes and always um, working towards ends to help our survivors, our vets, and our champions. So I just encourage people to
Absolutely.
really, especially this time, the holidays, for any survivor, can always be a difficult time. That's where most time they're have more family time, but there's always stuff going on, so just be mindful to be in prayer for those
Absolutely.
around us. So
Absolutely. Indeed. And as we're realizing more and more, there are so many around us
yeah.
that can certainly do with, even if it's just a word of kindness, makes a big
Hmm.
difference. Anyway, so we are still doing I think, part four now of the dark side of the Gateway experience, or the Gateway project, the Gateway experience. Is that the same thing?
uh, as far as I understand it to be, yes.
Yeah, because
Yeah, same here.
I hear some people call it project and experience. So I was just wondering if it is the same thing. Mona, you were saying something?
Yeah, I think it's the same. Yeah,
Okay.
it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, Jess. So I'm going to hand over to you again, so you can continue with. We now. I don't know if any of our viewers have this document, but we are basically on now number 11, consciousness and energy.
Yeah. So as we get into this now, a good way to describe what we're getting into is just really going to be the science of the spiritual world. So that's what these next sections, they're kind of, explaining that interface between how we've been thinking about these things scientifically in the physical, and then how it transposes into um, the spiritual world. So we're on section 11, which is called the consciousness and energy. So that's going to look at, you know, what we would call somebody's kind of perception of, how do they consciously view the physical and the spiritual world. And, it's important to realize that there's two different ways that we are conscious. We have a consciousness and an awareness, where we're able to think, we're able to receive, we're able to kind of output energy in in what we would call the physical reality when we're awake. But you also have a consciousness when you're asleep. So, there would be testing that would go on um, at both times to see, when are you conscious and how do you perceive during those times. It says, before explanation can proceed any further, it is essential to define the mechanism by which the human mind exercises the function known as consciousness, and to describe the way in which the consciousness operates to deduce meaning to the stimuli which it receives. Um, so part of that, when you think about that, when they're doing experiments on people who are sleeping, there's a conscious awareness while you're going through that, whether you're dreaming or whether you're out of that dream state. And how do you, or, what's your thought process? How do you remember when you wake up? Do you, remember your dreams in full? Do you not remember anything at all? So all these things are going to be looked at. And it says, to do this, we will first consider the fundamental character of the material world in which we have physical existence in order to accurately perceive the raw stuff with which our consciousness must work. So, the real world time frames, I'm just going to explain this as from my understanding as a child, is that you have physical locations. We've talked about the 4 military bases, each of those representing a different area within, we'll say, within the physical world. So each of those are going to have their own specialties, so when we start to break that down, as a child, you're taught to think of those 4 military bases as kind of being connected to the elements, connected to their area of magical focus, even though, that may not directly be looked at first glance, but, you learn which of those bases are connected to those elements and their place on what we would consider to be the pentagram, or in other words, the Solomonic magic symbol, which overall is going to be your entrance points in or out of the spiritual world. So there's always this overlap that you're taught to have in your mind when you think about those bases. And we kind of decoded it as the showing the Rosicrucian layman that each of those points on there, when you think of a cross, which in their world, that's the sign in which they're going to conquer. Well, what are they exactly conquering? Is it just physical territories? No, their goal is to conquer spiritual territories as well, which that's what feeds Satan's agendas, that he wants to usurp the throne of God. So he has to be able to conquer both physical and spiritual territories. So when you think of that cross, you've got up top where you've got the northern base, over on this side, you're going to have that Maryland base, which is for water. You're going to have the southern base, which is for fire. Then you'll have the, other base, California base, which is for air. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, it goes. So you've got earth, you've got water, fire, air. And some of them, they purposely transpose the normal direction of things in elemental magic so that unless you're trained for it, you wouldn't understand how things are operating and working. So, kind of when you're learning that physical world, the physical world is defined in different areas. And so when you're defining in that, each base is going to have a name that you're taught. And when you're using that name for it, it's constituting the physical location of that base in the world. But each base also has a spiritual location. Thus, that's why it's also called, the California base is also called Neverland. Okay, the Florida base is also called Candyland. It goes on and on, where you have Oz, which is the spiritual location underground for under the Pentagon. But what's the above ground, the physical location? So if you're saying go to the Pentagon, you're talking about the physical location of that same spot. But, yet we think, how can it have a physical and a spiritual location? but it does. And does some of Oz, manifest physically? It does.
Do you remember? I'm just wondering. There was a TV series many years ago called Oz, OZ, and it was about hardened criminals in this jail called Oz. I'm just wondering, where there's so many correlations to these things, would there be any connection to anything like that? I don't know if any of the viewers remember that.
There could be. It'd be interesting. I haven't seen it for years. It would be interesting to see if it does, if there is that. So.
Because it is quite shocking. I remember that being a pretty shocking, very violent, very graphic series. It was on late at night, and I remember once or twice catching it and really just watching because it was so raw. So when you talk about Oz, it immediately makes me think about that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to look into that in the future.
Yeah.
But anyway, so each designated space, you've got two entirely distinct existences, basically, but technically those existences are both in the physical world, even though you can't necessarily see that all the time. It says, indeed, if the term matter is taken to mean solid substance as opposed to energy, which is understood to mean a force of some sort, then the use of the former is entirely misleading. Science now knows that both the electrons, which spin in the energy field located around the nucleus of the atom, and the nucleus itself are made up of oscillating energy grids. Solid matter, in this strict construction of the term, simply does not exist. So, that's saying that, what is solid matter? It's simply the perception, between that physical and that spiritual reality. Rather, atomic structure is composed of oscillating energy grids surrounding by other oscillating energy grids, which orbit at extraordinary high speeds. So, if, we've talked about, if you could imagine this, it's like imagining a globe, and that globe constantly has all these energy lines orbiting in every direction around it, or kind of like a rubber band ball, where you have all these rubber bands wrapped around it, each their own distinct, energy grid, and each vibrating. And it says that they vibrate, at 1022 hertz. Now, I'm going to kind of break a little secret here today, and this is going to really excite you, especially as we get on in this paper. But, what is the 10 with the 22 behind it, to the power of 22 hertz? I'm going to let you know that those powers are very important as we read through this and understanding something. And that is basically, those powers not only represent, the energy and stuff, but really they also, tell us at what degree level, like why does Freemasonry, why does illumination have degree levels? It's because it's based on how they perceive or where they're operating on that energy grid. So, so what does this say? It says the energy grid, which composes the nucleus of the atom, vibrates at approximately 22 hertz. So that person that can access that point of vibration where, they're starting to enter into the spirit world, it can start before level 22, but, that degree is where, you have that awareness of it. And, your awareness of the osculation, how many of those, rubber band balls or energy fields can you start to pick up? Okay,
Yeah.
so, a first degree Mason to a third degree Mason means that they're only picking up, the first degree can only pick up the physical world. The second degree can pick up 2 of those osculations. So think about a 33rd degree now. You've got 33 of those points, dimensional axes that they can be aware of.
Wow.
Another way to explain it would be, when you start to think of it in different form, you have a hallway, you have 33 doors, they're able to enter into each of those spiritual dimensions separately, and the
Through the
spaces in
different
between them.
doors. So how would they train? I mean, okay, let me just rephrase that. What you've been telling us in the past, the training that they obviously do, this would be as they increase their level of training, as they rise in the rank, so to speak, to first, to third, to 10th, to whatever it is, right, in the Masonic degrees. That's then they've been able to master certain levels of energy work.
Right.
So they taught to work with energy and manipulate it, because that's not working with it. That's actually manipulating it, right? And then as they then learn how to manipulate it more and more and work on these various oscillations, right? Is that what they call they work with the various different oscillations, so they rise in their degree as Masons. Yeah? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Wow.
So builders in the physical sense, but also builders in the spiritual sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good grief.
So, it's important to keep that in mind as we continue on here, because that's going to kind of be the backbone for some of this next part. So let's skip down just a little bit. It says, a live human cell vibrates at approximately 10 to the third power. The point to be made is that the entire human being, brain, consciousness, and all, like the universe which surrounds him, nothing more or less than the extraordinary complex system of energy fields. The so-called states of matter are actually variances in the state of energy, and human consciousness is a function of the interaction of energy in 2 opposite states, motion versus rest, in a matter described in the following paragraphs. So we're going to start to get into now, energy in motion versus energy at rest. And, even starting at that third degree, it says a live human cell vibrates at approximately 10.3 hertz. So, when are you going to be conscious or able to consciously be aware of the energy within your own human cells? That's going to be at the third degree, where you start to have that self-awareness of your own energy. So as we get into this, the next section is called holograms.
Jessie,
but I would add some more
I'm sorry. That is so profound. I mean, you've literally given us the answer right there. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I simply had to say that, because I don't know if our viewers realize how important that is, what you've just said. It is literally unlocking their secrets, right? To understand when they've kind of like modeled themselves, if you will, against that and using that as their secret code, we understand what their powers are. It's that simple, right?
Right.
But then, of course, it's understanding what resides within those powers, because I'm sure those levels, let's say the 22nd degree, would have so many layers of whatever that entails, right? So it's all wrapped within each other.
Right. And each one is more awareness. It has to start, with your consciousness for yourself and the direct energy within your body before you can then move outward, where you are consciously aware of the energy universally.
Absolutely.
And then learning to control, learn to interact, learn to, as we get on, you'll see it gets more interesting because it goes beyond just the concrete physical to what's the ultimate. You have the eternal, where there's, limitless.
Yeah. And then, of course, they would manipulate that energy according to the way they wanted to, if that makes sense. So that limitless ability that their subjects reach in these programs is then what they would manipulate to suit their nefarious needs. Am I right?
In a way, yes. In a way, they have no control over that last phase, because really what you have, what is limitless, if we were to relate it to other terms, you have the resurrected body, the transformed body, which is the eternal body, which God has created to live and dwell with him. So that's really what they're, trying to control, is that eternal body that God has given to each of us.
And eternal being limitless. So hence their extreme measures of control and torture and rituals, etc., before the child is even, when the child is conceived, literally in some cases, they start with the trauma and the torture, because that is what keeps that feeling that you are limitless, if you understand what I'm saying. I'm not sure, I'm kind of grappling for words here at the moment, but they keep from the kids from a very young age, they keep them under control through pain and trauma, because what they've done here is they've seen what naturally occurs in the human energy or in the human body, and they're exploiting that to their own. Exactly.
Yeah, it is a physical exploitation plus a spiritual exploitation. And how do they get away with it? They get away with it because of our amendments, that we our first rights, that we have a right to religion, right? So they put all of that technically under religious, spiritual terms, which nobody has the authority to really control. Yet, then how can you have, this religion functioning within our U.S. military and government? That's exactly how they've been doing it and getting away with things, having then the military, the government being the enforcement, and the way that, ensures that they're able to practice their religion without any, basically limitations. And in that, we need to learn to start, instead of calling all this, spiritual or religious experiences, that's why I fought to, call this a system, because what we have happening is that we have a organized, coordinated system that is committing crimes against humanity, both physically and spiritually, and they need to be held accountable because it's not okay to, commit crimes against others.
And because life is spiritual before we're physical, these guys know that. So, which is why I also think as part of the indoctrination, that they impose upon humanity, because most of humanity has forgotten that we are spiritual before we became physical, and then we become spiritual again, right? Back to God, it's spirit. So at the end of the day, it's like that part where humanity has forgotten that this is not the be all and the end all, although it's a very important link in our chain of as a soul, right? But at the end of the day, these guys have understood that to compromise us spiritually means they've compromised us physically, whether it's in our health or whether it's in our ability to have happy lives or whatever it is. They completely are masters at understanding how they know that the minute the spirit is compromised, it's a natural knock-on effect, if you will, that the physical body or physical experience, if you will, is then compromised as well. Very, very clever. And that's why we keep saying, get back into alignment with God, spirit, pray, whatever, it's that connection that is the thing that saves us at the end of the day, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this next section that's labeled holograms, really what it's about is the perception of self in the spirit world. So, as they go on with, studying an individual's consciousness, whether they're awake or asleep, they're going to look at what is their perception of self in the spirit world. So here's where you get into, some of the other terms. They use the term hologram, but some of the other ones that they do use as well is avatars, paper dolls, characters, altars. Then you also have, I guess, what we would call, in every set of these projects, they're always going to have some that are singulars. I don't know what else to call it, but we're going to call them singulars, where, these are the individuals that have a very solid view of self, whether in the physical or the spiritual, whether awake or dreaming. They see themselves as themselves. So as we get into this, it says energy creates, stores, and receives meaning in the universe by projecting or expanding at certain frequencies in a three-dimensional mode that creates a living pattern called a hologram. The concept of the hologram can be most easily understood by using an example cited by Bentoff, in which he asks the reader to visualize a bowl full of water into which 3 pebbles are dropped. As the ripples created by the stimulus entry of the 3 pebbles radiate outward towards the rim of the bowl, Bentoff further asks the reader to visualize that the surface of the water is suddenly flash frozen so that the ripple pattern is preserved instantly. Now, with that, we know that everything has energy. Everything vibrates at a certain frequency, which is measured in hertz. Everything has a pattern. I encourage people, you can do a lot of research on, vibration resonance through sound. And, as certain sounds are played, like some of the videos will show, like, these boards, sound boards with sand on top. And as they change the hertz or the vibration level, you'll see these different, very distinct patterns form. Okay. Now, when you think about that, though, here's where we get into the distinguishing of soul resonance. That, you know, as they would do that, how would they know, you know, which children they're using, where those children's soul resonates in which dimension? This then goes back to some of the former shows we've done where we talked about diamonds and lace. So, you know, those patterns become reminiscent of lace or of diamonds, which is how they would, you know, distinguish to be able to give a visual so that, you know, they don't have to walk around and be like, hey, yo, what's your hertz? What's your energy? You know, they don't want to admit those things out loud. Okay, so it's a very, you know, secret, silent system. They want to walk into a room, and as you walk in that room, just by looking at people, looking at their attire, how they're dressed, you automatically know who's your level 1 and who's your above level 1, right? And you're going to associate. You're not even going to give more than a glance to those level 1s because, you know, you're far beyond that. You know, you're going to go towards the individuals that, you know, are preparing themselves and are at the same level you are. So that becomes then some of the, you know, distinguishing. And, you know, it says then the ice is exposed to powerful, coherent source of light, such as a laser. So as we get into this, they're going to start to bring in that concept of the control and the use of light, that as you have, you know, this awareness to the different spiritual dimensions. You know, if you're at the first dimension, you're just going to have awareness of that. But if you know, how it builds is like, you know, you can't just be, I mean, I guess you could just be aware of the second dimension. That's possible. But usually, if you're aware of the second dimension, you also are aware of the first dimension. Just like, you know, somebody who's level 33 or degree 33, they're going to be aware of all 33 dimensions. Okay, so there's a building in that. But as that awareness grows, not only is there, you know, the input, the awareness of that reality, but there also is an energy output. And that energy output, they're taught to have focused. You know, what is that laser, that beam of light? Well, now we're starting to talk about energy weapons. And who's the energy weapon? What is the energy weapon? You know, what is the source and the control of that energy? It's the individual who is consciously aware of it.
Absolutely. So
Okay,
it's the person themselves. They are the weapon.
Right, correct. So now you're going to get into where they begin to define that energy output. The first classification is that you've got limited. Okay, so let's say, you know, that person is aware of, let's just say for fun's sake, you know, they're aware of the 3 dimensions, and, you know, their limited energy is that they can, you know, poof, make a little fire, you know, in their hand, right? But then that fire, they can focus, they can make that a laser beam of light. Yay, they've got control over 1 laser, okay? That's going to be limited access or limited energy. But what is the potential of that? It can be limitless. You know, how much energy output can one person do? How many rays of light? Well, now you start to get into the higher enlightened self and their symbology of the sunshine with multiple rays. And, you know, they're going to begin looking at, you know, with that energy output of that laser of light, you know, how much of that focused energy are you able to output? How far can it go? You know, can you just use that energy to, you know, to direct it towards a chalkboard or towards a point that's in the same room with you? Can you focus that energy where then, you know, it's manifesting in the room next to you? Hey, you know, can you go beyond your building where you're in your city or your state? Can you go across multiple states and keep that same energy flow? You know, can you connect now to satellites and manipulate that laser energy flow in multiple directions, hit targeting multiple places around the world? You know, so they're looking at what are the limits in that energy control. And
Limitless. Yeah, they're looking for limitless, aren't they?
right, so here's where we get then into some of, you know, the fracturing. And, you know, we talked about, you know, that perception of self. In that, you know, they're going to encourage you with the holograms, the avatars, the paper dolls, the characters, the altars. Um, each, I wouldn't say it's necessarily left up to each child, because, you know, in some ways it's the scientist, it's whoever is working with that child. But here's, you know, the next level of that is that, you know, depending on the programs, so the initial program with that was trauma based, they're fracturing or splitting the mind. They're they're teaching, you know, that individual to compartmentalize their mind, which each compartmentalization is going to come with a created altar. Um, so, you know, what is that altar's ability? And in a way, you know, can they then multiply the energy output by having that individual believe that they are more than one person, essentially? That, you know, when they're gathering in a ritual, maybe one individual is now representing, you know, 2 or 12, right? So what is the energy output then, and what is the control level? And when you think about that, the tax on the physical body with that type of abuse and experimentation, you know, it it's, you know, it was very common in the 50s through, you know, the end of the 50s through the 80s, where, you know, what was the body's taxing response to such harsh treatment? It was that, you know, the individual would mentally give. They would break.
Yeah.
They couldn't function as one person, but functioning as, you know, 5 or 10 or 12 all the time. They couldn't function that way. So the system had a problem. You know, they were breaking more people than they were keeping useful operating people that could be used in operations. Um, you know, that's how harsh the abuse was. And we're just, you know, talking about it kind of from their own terms, um, the issues that they were dealing with. And, you know, so they had to find a way to control that. They had, you know, they tried to fix, they would reprogram people, try to keep them functioning. But really, what was the limit? And this is kind of interesting. Um, you know, the limit was around 30 years. And then the individual would start to break down to where, you know, they weren't operational or functional or useful for the system anymore. in that capacity. So, that's a long time, but it's interesting that kind of there was a cap on that. And 30 years was what they got. And then they needed to find something different, which is where then the trauma-based programming was transferred by Aquino and others into the mind construct, where, what did they find was the base issue with, being able to use somebody beyond age 30, you know, because let's just say the programming broke down, no longer, was it hidden from your consciousness that you're not just one person, but you're, 30, because they would keep it where consciously, unless they were in control of the situation, you know, your self-awareness was just one at a time, one altar at a time were you consciously aware of. So as that program broke down, people became more and more aware of their complex selves. And
is this what we're seeing in a lot of the celebrities at the moment? With a lot of we often see like them breaking down. I mean, commonly Britney Spears, Miley, Kanye West recently. These are just the recent ones. But if we look at years gone by, for example, and we're just looking at the celebrities, because for me, that would be the most common place they would use their puppets from what we can see, because they're so on display for the world. So if we go back, let's say to the 50s with the Marilyn Monroes and stuff of the world, there was definitely the odd one like Marilyn Monroe, for example. But we're seeing a lot more of that recently, of people just having meltdowns and stuff. So it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, that it's actually breaking people. They've used people as lab rats to see how far they could push this infinity, right? And then this is the results, with there's a lot of very broken puppets that they've used. And not just their puppets on display, but just the people that they've tested on behind the scenes for all these decades. I mean, this is shocking. Yeah. It's shocking, actually.
So the biggest thing they were fighting against in all that was the human will, because God has given us each a personal will. And so, in the trauma-based programming, it's a program that, thrives off of forcing an individual's will through trauma. So that's when Aquino in the 80s, they went to the mind construct, where in that the person is, they get the will to agree to things, to agree to, entering into this physical, spiritual reality without having to do the trauma-based programming. They apply to your morals, to your ethics in a way. So that's where some of the difference is, seeing if they would get a longer, more longevity in the use of energy in that by applying to the morals. So in that too, we see the exchange or a difference starting to happen between the dark side of the system, being in control, and the light side then taking over to prepare humanity for, entering that space of higher enlightenment.
Absolutely.
So as we get to this next part, it's called "The Part Encodes the Whole." It says, of further importance is the fact that even if we dropped a frozen hologram, what's the hologram representing? It's that consciousness of self, the avatar, however you're perceiving yourself at the moment in that spiritual reality. The frozen, part is meant to help you visualize, that energy in a more solid form, where visually you're seeing all that energy not active, but you're kind of seeing it at rest. So it says, even if we were to drop our frozen hologram of the ripple pattern on the floor and broke it into a number of pieces, each individual piece would recreate the entire holographic image all by itself. Now, they didn't use that visualization when I was a child, a lot with people. What I saw was, they would use kind of that imagery of being in a mirror house where you see yourself, but then you're seeing all these different images of yourself within those mirrors. So it says, the smaller the piece, the fuzzier and the more distorted it would be, resulting in holographic projection. But the fact remains that the whole projection would nonetheless be made. So you're going to see yourself in all those different mirrors. The closer the mirror is to you, the better you see the details of self. The more power, the more connected, the more energy you are. As you get further down, everything becomes more blurry, less control. And, so as we're visualizing that, this is where we get into what they call the hourglass, where you have the physical world starts down here at the bottom of the hourglass. And as you go from that physical world into the spiritual world, you have, where it gets a point where you have less energy. You start out with more energy. You have to learn to control that energy into a smaller amount. But then once you hit that line where you transfer from the physical into the spiritual, all of a sudden now that energy begins to broaden again. So, it's learning how to control that. Some of the other visualizations they'll use with that hourglass figure is the railroads, where you're in one spot, you're seeing the time or the horizon broaden out. So those are different ways, and that's, the compression and the expansion of energy is what they're looking at. And so, it says that, in those spaces you have energy that becomes more fuzzier, more distorted, which also means that you're going to have less control. And it says the key to creating any hologram is that energy in motion must interact with energy at a state of rest. So, you're always going to have that energy in motion, but where's the interaction point? It's right between that physical and that spiritual world. You've got energy both ways.
Yeah.
So that then becomes, when we're thinking about this another way, to describe that hourglass, you have octave sound, okay? And how they do it, is that beginning point at the full expansion is going to be your O, which is, that's your bass sound. It's connected very low. That's your grounding sound. As you go up towards, this in-between space here that's getting less full, and then the space beyond it is going to be your Ma, and then you've got your Ra, which is the full release again. And what's that point right in the middle? And above and below, you have your sets, your stops. So as you're doing this visually, there's the sound or the physical component in that as well. So it says, in the foregoing example, the pebbles represent energy in motion, while the water, before it's agitated by the pebbles, represents energy at the state of rest. to activate or in effect to perceive the meaning of the hologram or the energy. A coherent light source such as a laser beam must be passed through the interference pattern generated by the interaction between the moving energy and the energy at rest. So, you know, whatever that interface is, and they've played with a lot of things. You know, in the old days, you know, what were the witches and warlocks trained to, you know, use as that energy source, or that was not the energy source, but that place of rest for them to interact with, to gain access into that spiritual world. You know, they used water, they used mirrors, they used doorways. Okay, so that interface can really be anything. You know, when you get above a certain level, you know, you don't even need anything per se, because you know, you realize you're able to use physical reality itself as that resting spot, because you realize all the other dimensions and everything are moving around it. So the whole physical universe becomes that interface point. So they're looking at, you know, what can you use for interfaces. Thus, you're gonna, you know, you're gonna have training with the mirrors. You know, accessing the spiritual world through that. You're gonna have training using doorways, real physical doorways. You're gonna have the corridor. Oh, we got a car alarm. You're gonna have like a hallway or a corridor with lots of different doors. Um, you know, so it depends on each of, I guess, you know, what I would say too is that depending on the base, you know, each base has its own program associated with it that's connected to a fairy tale. Each of those fairy tales are going to have different trainings, which, you know, the majority of children going through these military programs will have a stint at each of those bases to learn, you know, where do they operate best, where do they fit in, where should their training then continue. So like the California base, you know, which is connected more to water, you're going to learn more, you know, access points that are going to deal with water or air, which is another form of, you know, you get a lot of water in the air. So it's just going to depend on what your specialty is. You know, the northern base is going to focus more on earth, or, you know, ground, rock, more stationary elementals. You also have the bases that, you know, their specialty is going to be ice, which is a whole different form of water. So that's kind of how that's broken down. So we're going to skip, let me see where there was one more I wanted, maybe that was the part. No, so I want to get into, like, they kind of in the next sections, they just begin to talk about consciousness of the matrix. And, you know, really it's just, how does that consciousness work? How is a person processing both the physical and the spiritual world? You know, that is going to kind of be considered the electromagnetic field, which we talked about. You know, I've shared that electromagnetic field beyond the physical, that would be at these projects or experiments. You know, you would always have what I call the witchy force, where you've got the people that are chanting, they're singing, they're moving, they're dancing, you know, they're doing orgies, they're, you know, creating that sexual magic in order to help create more energy that you can access in these things. And then, you know, the other consciousness, if you can see it, is the demonic or the angelic realm. And that's going to be what they classify as the magnetic force. Within that, you always have negatives, you have positives. You know, so that's going to be based on, you know, the type of energy that you're accessing, and its pull, its movement in the spirit world. And from my understanding, you know, the positive energy is more expansive, where the negative energy is going to be more pulling. So it'll be more focused in self, where the other one is able to output more. So it talks about the brain phase in that. I really, you know, we can kind of skip over that part. But they do have an interesting picture as they talk about the brain phase there. And I think that, you know, is another imagery. It gives kind of that, you know, kind of a different shape. But what we were talking about with all those energy awarenesses, that's another way that they show that energy perception and awareness.
Yes.
All right, so here's where we get into the fun part. And I want to read this entire section because I think this is where it's going to really connect and break through for a lot of people in their understanding. But it's titled The Time-Space Dimension. And it says, up to this point, our discussion of the gateway process has been relatively simple and easy to follow. Now the fun begins. The gateway involves more than just perception of those aspects of the universal hologram which can be accessed in the dimension of time-space as we know it. To explain how and why the human consciousness can be brought to transcend the limitations of space and time is the next task which we must address. To do this, we must first appreciate that time and space are, or what time and space are, in order to understand how the dimension that they constitute can be transcended. Physicists define time as a measurement of energy or force in motion. So in that, you know, let's begin to think about, they've got on the next page kind of a example here that we're going to use. Okay, so this is representing, you know, where we see the lines going up and down, that's representing energy in motion. And then the straight lines that we see in between are measuring energy at rest. Now, if you're really paying attention to all this, you know, what are we getting into? We're getting into the resonance. So think about the Schumann's resonance. What, you know, when it's talking about the resonance of the earth, I would propose really, you know, in our mind, that makes us visualize that the earth has a voice, which it does. But I think that they're measuring far more. And as we begin to unpack this a little bit, you'll understand what exactly they're measuring on that Schumann resonance, and why it's used as a communication board. So to explain how and why human consciousness can be brought to transcend the limitations of time and space, to do this, we must first appreciate that time and space, or what time and space are, in order to understand how the dimension that they constitute can be transcended. We'll skip past a little bit further here. In other words, it is a measurement of change. So the change between energy in motion and energy at rest. However, in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some sort of vibratory pattern so that its confinement gives it the capacity for being contained at a specific location, which is distinguishable from other locations or other spaces. So, first you have to be at rest at your location. All energy will, have a starting and a stopping point in their experiment. So in this, I want people to really hear this. What is it saying is that first energy must be contained. Okay? But what does that propose to us? This is really important. When we think about it, because it's talking about limited and unlimited, what did we define as the unlimited state? It's the resurrected, the eternal state that resonates and moves with God, right? So we are, in a sense, when we are in Christ, we are in that eternal, limitless state. This is part of their programming, their understanding. Why don't they just, for the majority of their, training programming, why do they still allow Christianity and people to have a relationship with God? It's because that relationship leads you to that state of salvation or righteousness or relationship with God, where you begin to understand that eternal state that your body can be in. But in that, then the abuse starts, where they want you to believe that, you have to earn that state. You have to earn that final state, which is not what Scripture says. It says it's a free gift. God gives it to all. All we have to do is receive it. We have that free resurrected life that was purchased and bought for us through Jesus Christ, right? So they want you to believe that there are limitations on your eternal body. Here's the other thing. When we begin to think about, here's where they bring in that fear of death. What does the fear of death do? It keeps us in that limited energy state. We don't access the eternal state. We don't realize that literally, that eternal state is not accomplished once we die physically. We have that eternal state now. As hard as that is to believe, we have that eternal state now that we can access. And so they want us to have that fear of death. They want us to believe that there's a limit on our energy, and in that they control. So this is part of the spiritual abuse. It's all to keep us from understanding that we have that eternal state now. And, so that's part of when they talk about, that first energy has to be contained. Well, here's the other thing in that, we are created in God's image, yet we are all bound the moment we're born to that sinful, that fleshly nature that has to be done away with, right? What is that confinement of that fleshly nature? It's that, that limiting space, that our focus, our consciousness limits, that, we're just here in the physical. We don't see the fullness of our physical, spiritual body together. We separate. And so that's something that they do as well, is create that separated consciousness, where we believe that, here in the physical, we have limited energy, and in the spiritual, we have unlimited energy. They create that understanding.
Exactly.
What is the truth? the truth is that the moment we're born, we're created in God's image. And once we put to death that physical, limited consciousness, we then understand the fullness and can physically and spiritually walk out that unlimited awareness of self. So that's what they are trying to limit, all of that. It says, so let's go on here. So first they will confine, they're going to contain that understanding. Energy which is not confined is force without limit. Did you hear that? Energy that is not confined is force without limit, without dimension, and without the limits of form. Right? So why do they teach you that it's limited starting at a young age, is so they can control, they can limit your physical, your spiritual body. They can limit the dimensions you can access, and they can limit the forms that you can take, which are, your physical form and your spiritual form. So let's get into some of their terms as they begin to give people access to their form. We have different states of matter. You have water in its liquid state. You have a gas state, which is the spiritual state. You also have ice, but they call it, the different, we'll say frequencies, vibration of that spiritual self are called terrestrial, is the base level. Then they get to extraterrestrial, which is unlimited energy, unlimited form.
What? You kidding? Are you being serious? That's what it actually is.
I'm being serious.
I need to think about that, because that's just bizarre. I mean, I don't even know what to make about that, honestly. I mean, it's crazy.
So terrestrial is going to be more physically grounded. Extraterrestrial is out in space, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So, but think about that. Where is the energy focus for terrestrial? It's here on the physical earth, the, one dimension. Where is extraterrestrial focused? It's focused interdimensionally. There is no limit to the dimensions, right?
Yeah.
So when they talk about extraterrestrials, what are those warriors' capabilities with their physical, spiritual states of matter they've learned to master, dimensions, space, which also would mean then, if they've mastered not being limited by time or space, they're able to convert their physical body into their spiritual state, or vice versa, at will. So extraterrestrial, I would propose, is it is a being, but you're talking about degrees of illumination.
Yes,
it's a terrestrial
being who has the ability to project his or her consciousness, right, into, I wouldn't say limitless, because they might probably think it's going to be limitless, but to beyond the limitations of their physical body, into various areas or portals or whatever it is, wherever they're good at. I would imagine this would also be where the kids, etc., would be tested to see where their gifts or their strengths lie, right? So they would then be considered extraterrestrial in certain areas. So it's not these little funny green men, right?
No. And
oh no! how damn disappointing.
And so its fullness, we've heard about the ghost warriors, those who can come through floors, those who can come through walls, those that can
Michael Karkov.
Yeah. And so how does that happen? It's technically their classification is extraterrestrial.
And then do they have a secret little number, like I'm an ET33 or like a 99 or something? Do they have like a secret little ET number that only they know?
Well, at that point, they begin to get into how they measure that, is, I guess, in degrees. So you would have, 30 degree, 60 degree, 90 degree, 180 degree, and 360 degrees illumination. So how illuminated are you?
Okay, so who, according to what you understand, and this is purely out of curiosity, because I know we've got a double show today and I don't want to tire you out. So maybe I'm not sure if we should take it over to the next channel later or whatever, we can discuss.
Let's finish this section and then we'll go to the next one. Yeah.
So who, according to you, is the most highly illuminated, decorated illuminator on this planet?
Well, I mean, you have a bunch that are at 360. I don't know if there's one higher than the other per se. They've all kind of reached that same, we'll say that same point, or that same definition of illumination. So you have multiple individuals who are at that very skilled, so I don't think there's just one. But
so now when we're looking at, like a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about it on this channel about those creepy things that are appearing out of nowhere, like those ETs, right? That these people saw in their garden. Right. Okay. So what are we looking at there then? How does that connect to this?
Well, you have in that, in these programs, not only do you have human beings learning different degrees of illumination, but, kind of working the opposite direction from, that full illuminated state to the lessening illuminated state, which then can manifest physically. And it doesn't mean, it's not a demotion. I'm just trying to find a way to put it into words. But you have spiritual beings as well.
But they can change shape. So that part of illumination is them shape-shifting, if you will, into these ET
into physical forms.
No way.
That makes no sense. Why does it make sense?
Total sense. Wow.
Yeah.
Guys.
So you have the program works both ways, where you have physical beings that are learning to manifest as spiritual beings, and you have spiritual beings learning to manifest as physical beings.
As physical. Wow. That's insane. Okay, we've got a lot of food for thought.
Yeah. All right. So let's just quick finish this last little part of the paragraph. And it says, but if energy, so how they measure that, what is the limitless space of energy? It's considered infinity. Okay. So now when you think about this, think about companies, energy companies, look into that infinity loop, right? Limitless energy in both the physical and the spiritual. There are no boundaries, no here, to differentiate from there, no sense of area. Energy in infinity means energy uniformly extended without limit. It has no beginning, no end, and no location. Okay? So that's important to focus on that. It has no beginning, no end, no location. It is conscious force, the fundamental primal power of existence without form, a state of infinite being. Energy and affinity is said to be completely at rest. Isn't that interesting? So think of scripture where the Lord tells Israel, "You shall not enter my rest." On the seventh day, God created rest, infinite energy, that place of infinite energy. So scientifically, for all of you who have been wondering if there is a spirit world, life after death, we've just scientifically proven to you eternity. Energy and affinity is said to be completely at rest, therefore cannot generate holograms so long as it remains utterly inactive. It retains its inherent capacity, so that means it's reached its full capacity in that eternal state for consciousness. So there, it's reached its eternal or its capacity for consciousness in that it can receive and passively receive holograms generated by energy and motion out in the various dimensions which make up the created universe, but it cannot be perceived by consciousness operating in the active universe. Energy in this state is inactive infinity, is termed in by physicists as energy in its absolute state, the absolutes. So that these terms are going to become important as we read into more. Like I've brought forth the Star Wars Now project, which scientifically describes, what happened in the weaponization of children on April 24th, 1984. And they talk about these terms, absolute. So is there a point, a place, where technically children in unlimited form, brought forth or were able to show, witness, open up that eternal space, which is heaven, right? So the absolute state is what can open all those spiritual gates and that access to eternity, to heaven. Between the absolute and the material universe in which we experience our physical existence are various intervening dimensions to which human consciousness and altered states of being can gain access. Theoretically, human consciousness may continue to expand the horizons of its perceptual capacity until it reaches the dimension of absolute, at which point perception stops because the absolute generates no holograms of or about itself. So
it just is, right? So we, through our actions and movement and etc., create the holograms and the patterns and whatever it is that are picked up in whatever it is that people are seeing. Makes perfect sense. That perfect place of stillness where it just is. And there's no conflict, there's no nothing. It's just that moment or that time, if you will. Wow. This is super interesting. I'm watching.
Yeah, we got to get into the next few sections here because it gets even more interesting. So,
are we going to do that on the show after this? Because we were going to do Q&A, but if you're happy to, we can continue on solutions at 3:30.
Yeah, we can continue and then.
Okay, let's do that then, guys. Give Jess a bit of a break. This is intense. And it's quite a bit to absorb. I mean, I'm still mortified that I don't have little aliens with big eyes floating around. And that could be Michael, what's his name? A kiddo or something, looking all cute,
Right.
projecting himself like little Yoda or something. That's just terrifying. Can you imagine? Anyway,
I
guys.
can imagine, yes. Usually there was a fee, fi, fo, fum that came with it, to cause fear. You never knew if he was coming himself or was he summoning a giant. What the hell was going on?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Thank you so much, Evolving Sylvia. Really appreciate your sticker. Yay. Thank you so much. Guys, okay, we're going to take a little break. It is now 2:54 p.m. my time, which is, I don't know what time, Jessie, time it is there now. But we will,
just about 9 o'clock.
okay, so 9:30 Central Time, 3:30 CAT time.
Oh, not almost 9 o'clock Eastern time.
Eastern, yeah.
Eastern time. You see, I got it wrong, but don't worry, I'll eventually get it right. So Eastern time, 9:30 and 3:30 CAT or GMT +2. We'll see you guys back where we're going to take this further. We were going to have a Q&A with Jess. We will eventually get to that, but I know you guys all love that, but we will get there. But I really think this is super important and super, super interesting. So thank you so much. God bless you all. If we don't see you on the other side, then catch the recording later. But really enjoying what's being exposed here. So Jess, would you like to maybe just end off for us in prayer?
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your amazing creation, that you have created us as physical and spiritual beings. I thank you that you have created us to be eternal, to be in that state where we have limitless life. We have abundant life, as your word for limitless is abundant. We thank you that you are a giver of life. And we just ask that you would help us to retain, help us to understand these truths. And we ask that you would help us to make a change, to make a difference with them as we bring this truth really to light before the world, Lord. We ask that you would remove all fear of death. We ask that you would give us that final victory, Lord. For your word says, "O death, where is your sting? Where is their power?" And the truth is that death has lost his sting. He has lost his power. And you have given us abundant life. We just thank you. We take hold of that today. And we ask that you would show us how to live according to your will. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Jess, so much. Thank you, guys. And we shall see you in 30 minutes or so on Solutions with Aquarius Rising Africa. Catch you later. Thank you so much.